मेरे पता नहीं कर दो। Good morning, all of you. We will start within 2 minutes. Good morning, all. I, Dr. Kalpana Rai, welcome you all in the SAGE talk conducted by the Department of Computer Science and Engineering. Before we start the session, let's see the short video clip of the SAGE group. Due to some network issue, there is no sound in the video. Thank you, Vigyan sir, for this video. So today's speaker already joined us. So Dr. Ashok Bhansali, sir, is our today's speaker. Dr. Ashok Bhansali is currently serving as a Director, Career Development Center and Computer Science and Engineering at OP Jindal University. Sorry, due to some network issue, we break the session.
So can I take over?
Yes, sir. I want to give
no
some
need to
your
introduce, I'll
introduction.
introduce myself.
Yeah. Okay, sir.
Okay.
I
I'm
have some
Dr. Ashok
introduction.
Bhansali, working here at OP Jindal University as Director Career Development Services, as well as heading the Department of Computer Science and Engineering. I'm an alumnus of NIT Jamshedpur and NIT Raipur, and I'm a senior IEEE member. Apart from this, my special interest lies in social network mining, AI, ML, IoT, and related domain and technologies. So today, the topic for today's presentation is, let me share the PPT first. Is it visible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It is visible.
Fine. So we have the topic as Industry 4.0 and future technologies, whereas in the communication that has gone out, it has been written as future technologies and Industry 4.0. So it is just the reverse, Industry 4.0, and then we'll study or look into the technologies which really are required for Industry 4.0. Fine. So even before we started the topic, I'd like to, there are pretty less than 50 numbers of audience. It is really good in the sense that they'll be really able to have good conversation and discussions. So in the meantime, if you have got any questions, then please put your questions into the webinar chat box, and I'll try to answer the questions as far as I understand, I know. So why we are discussing Industry 4.0 and why it makes a lot of sense for India as a country. That is, every technocrat or engineer must understand the business, must understand the market, and must understand the technologies which are driving the market, irrespective of what is your domain. Whether you are engineer, whether you are management guy, whether you are science or art guy, anybody, it doesn't matter. So see, we are in a state, India is undergoing a state which we call as demographic dividend. What is demographic dividend? Demographic dividend is a state which is attained by a country in centuries, wherein the working age population is more than the dependent population. So it all started from 2005-6 onwards, and it will last up to half a century, that is 2055, 2056. So during this period of time, our working age population is more than the dependent population. And in the entire world, the countries whosoever have been transformed from developing nations to the developed nations, their transition took place during their demographic dividend era. And this is a period which a country which comes in the life of a country in centuries. So if we really miss this opportunity to transition our country from a developing nation to a developed nation, then it will really be very, very difficult, because we really won't know really don't know when next time this time will again come back to us. So it is very important for us because we already missed the bus of Industry Revolution 3.0, wherein we used to say that we are IT superpower, we will like a software giant and all those things. But despite all these, we missed Revolution 3.0, and Revolution 4.0 is the only opportunity that lies in front of us, and we really can like leverage on this. So let us try to understand what is Industry 4.0, what are the technologies which are driving this Industry 4.0 revolution, and why do we call this as a revolution at all? So if you look into this, then we understand that how it all like started from Industry 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0 and then to 4.0. The basic necessities of humans are like we say always roti, kapda and makan, food, clothing and shelter. So before, prior to this Industry 1.0 era, we used to work with our hands and at times animals used to help us. But this Industry 1.0 is driven by steam power and like water power. So this is the first, this is in like late 18th century wherein we started mass production. So one of the like biggest takeaways from Industry 1.0 that it started an era of mechanical mass production, and this like this introduced the world to a mechanical mass production facilities and how to harness the power of steam and water. Then we moved on to around 1870. There was another revolution, that is Industry 2.0. See, all these revolutions are driven by technologies. The first revolution was driven by steam and power. The second revolution is driven by electricity. The third revolution was driven by the electronics and the IT. And the fourth revolution will be driven by the digital, what we call as disruptive technologies. So this Industry 2.0, the electricity came into the picture. So how did it really impact? It made the processes more efficient in terms of maintenance and operations. And this Industry 2.0 laid down the foundation of the first assembly line. The mass productions which were initiated in Industry 1.0 were further streamlined and like made more efficient and effective during Industry 2.0. Moreover, one of the most significant achievement of this Industry 2.0 revolution was the time period which we used to give to the production facilities. There was no constant because of the availability of the industry. Earlier it was like 8 to 10 hours a day. Now it was 24 hours a day. Because of the availability of the electricity, the machines as well as humans could really work throughout the day and night. Then we moved on to Industry 3.0 revolution, which basically started with the electronics and ICs. And in order to support those electronics and ICs, we started like writing down small programs, PLCs and kind of things. So this was an era of automation, which really like helped us achieving greater speed, better control over the production, reduction in manpower efforts, and even in some cases, the complete replacement of the humans in the form of automation. And the softwares were developed to support electronics, to improve the operations, to improve the machines, to improve the management, all these things. Then we moved on to like the today's era. We are on the verge of like, you can say, the fourth industrial revolution. It has not yet taken place, but we are sitting on this transition phase. So the countries whosoever will take a lead will like be making a transition. Like Modi ji says these days a lot, like Atmanirbhar Bharat. So this industry really can play a significant role. And the kind of demographic dividend we do have, if we properly utilize our demographic dividend, then that can really be converted into economic dividend. And the world is driven only by economics, nothing else. Probably we all can understand this, and this really could be understood better during this COVID-19 situation. So Industry 4.0, the terminology that we use here is cyber physical system. Cyber physical system, it allows machine to machine communication without any physical or geographical barrier. That is most important. The human has completely come out of the loop. The geographical boundaries have completely been like, there is no demarcation. So machines can communicate with the machines. Machines can communicate with the processes, production processes. The production processes can communicate with the business processes. Business processes can communicate with the market. So there is an entire value chain which is from production to the market. And this product, the entire value chain adds a lot of value in terms of improved efficiency, in terms of better revenue generation, in terms of minimizing the maintenance, and a lot many things. So we call this as smart operations. We call it smart factories. We call it business 4.0 or smart business. The machines or the plants can diagnose themselves. Self-diagnostics is available. The predictive maintenance is available, and lot many things. But still we are at a very nascent stage of transforming into Industry 4.0, and it really makes a lot of sense for us as a country to take a leap forward and lead this 4.0 transformation in the context of entire world, because we have enough number of manpowers. Our young graduates or young generation is literate enough in terms of IT and digital technologies, and we really can make significant contribution, and we really can take a leap forward from this point. So what are the technologies which are leading this Industry 4.0 revolution? We call these technologies as digital disruptive technologies. So obviously we all understand what are digital technologies, but then we must understand what do we mean by disruptive technologies. Probably see, nobody of us ever thought that there will be a day wherein we'll be sending our daughters, our wives, our mothers to a different location in a car not owned by us and with a driver whoever we really don't know. But then thanks to Uber and Ola, that this is possible today. And this is what we call the disruption. Disruption is something which really has impacted us a lot, which has changed the way we used to think, which has changed the way we used to behave, which has changed the way we used to socialize, and almost everything else. So wherein there is a significant shift, paradigm shift in anything that we call as disruption. And this disruption is in the 4.0 era has completely been driven by digital technologies. So these are the technologies which are driving this digital disruption. Obviously, we all understand this is artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning. Then there is another technology which is data analytics, big data, and kind of things. Then there is a blockchain. Blockchain, data analytics, and artificial intelligence. These together combined as known as the trust validating technologies, which really can help us trusting entities which we really don't want to trust or which we really don't know. So automated trust is being generated by blockchain, AI, and big data. We'll see how this can be done in the further slides. Then of course, cloud computing. Everything is in cloud. It's an era, this COVID-19 has pushed it forward, work from home, the online live classes, the webinars and kind of things. This is all possible because of cloud technologies and cloud computing. Then we have Internet of Things. Internet of Things is probably at the background of almost every 4.0 machine-to-machine communication and complete automation. We have a lot of sensors attached to the machines. Those sensors sends data to the ERP or to the SAP or to any other systems, which really further connected with the business process automation and kind of things. An entire value chain is created, but then this Internet of Things driven largely by sensors and actuators is at the backbone. And cybersecurity really plays a very, very important role because all this has to be done in a very safe and secure manner. We must understand and appreciate the role of cybersecurity. You really like try to understand that a biological virus, COVID-19, could really disrupt the entire world. What will be the situation if a digital virus can really like entirely disrupt the operations of plants or the machineries? In case of that situation, if arise in future, we really won't be able to figure out how to solve that. At least in case of this biological virus, we have the precedences and we really know how to like tackle with this. And then the virtual reality and augmented reality, AR, VR, which is a new era, which is we call as immersive experience. This really will change and probably will affect most the education segment. The way we used to conduct the laboratories, the way the online MOOC classes are being taken, everything will be changing. And then 3D printing. 3D printing again, like today we send the files over the internet, and anybody can take a printout and can produce it to somebody or to somewhere. Similarly, there will be a time which is approaching fast, wherein we will be sending the printing files. Those printing files will be downloaded at the customer end. He will go to a 3D printer and 3D printer will produce a design as per the specification of those 3D printings. So very soon it will be a reality wherein rather than sending a digital card, you will be sending a gift which will be created at the real time and which will be delivered at your doorstep. So this digital disruptive technologies are at the they are the driving technologies for Industry 4.0 revolution. And probably we all understand the impact of this disruption. If we really could not cope up with this fast emerging changes, then we really don't stand in the market. We'll be obsolete, we'll be vanished. And there are many cases, if you look at, well, there was probably not more than 10 years back, that Kodak film was a very well known, but Kodak does not stand anywhere. So it is not about the technology adoption, it is the pace of adoption. How fast we really, or how quick you really can adopt these technologies for the betterment. That makes sense. Otherwise, you won't stay relevant in the market. And this is what has been told by this Mr. Pierre, who is CEO of Accenture. So now we'll have a look into one by one the technologies. We'll try to touch upon different technologies and how really they impact. So we'll start with big data and analytics, data analytics. So this is a data-driven world that we all have to agree. Data is probably everywhere. You really cannot even imagine. You really cannot even imagine the amount of data and as well as the value of the data. You just can have a look into this figure to understand how much data is being generated. We say that the total amount of data which has been generated in the last 2 years, it is the same which has been generated since very beginning of the human civilization to the last 2 years. And the data is being almost been doubled in 2 to 3 years. So this is the speed and pace with which we are creating data. But does it really make sense to create and store this much amount of data? Earlier, we used to have data centers wherein we usually used to store the meaningful data. We used to discard the data which we used to think that are of no use. So probably the numbers here are mind-boggling. This 118 million emails per day, 1 million Facebook login per day, 2.1 million Snapchats daily. Not daily, what? It says 1 minute. My God, you multiply it by 60 by 60 by 24. That is the amount of data that it is generating per day. 3.8 million of Google queries per minute. Unbelievable. And approximately 40 million messages sent per minute. So here from you really can gauge, you really can understand the amount of data that is generated per day, per year. So this in computer science, we always say that imagination is the limit. If we really can imagine something, that makes a lot of sense for us to understand. And we must understand how big really is the big data. And it gives you just a projection that how much data will be generated till 2025. So this 2025 will be having around 175 zettabytes. We all understand megabytes, that is 10 to the power 6. Then gigabytes, 10 to the power 9. Then terabytes, 10 to the power 12. Then petabytes, 10 to the power 15. So any data which is in the range of beyond terabytes or closer to the petabytes is considered as a big data. Then after this petabytes, we have exabytes, that is 10 to the power 18. Then we have zettabytes, that is 10 to the power 21. So we'll be having approximately 175 zettabytes of data by 2025. And then after zettabytes, we have yottabytes. Yottabytes is 10 to the power 24. And beyond that, probably nothing has been defined yet. But then it seems like we will be able to achieve the yottabytes of data in probably a decade or so. But still, even if we say that zettabyte and everything, we really don't understand. But to just give you an overall idea, you can say that 1 petabytes of data is approximately 5 million books of 200 pages each of approximately font size 10. That is the amount of data a petabyte is. And you won't trust a jet engine in an hour generates approximately 10 petabytes of data. So you imagine all the flights in the world, how much data is being generated by those flights. And that is why the black box analysis is so important and so crucial when there goes something wrong with any plane. But it's still like to understand how big is the big data. This by 2025, we will be having this 463 exabytes of data created each day. And in the previous slide, we studied that is 175 zettabytes. That was over the period of an entire year. So this is each day 463 exabytes. And this many number of DVDs, I really don't want to go through this number. But then it seems to be too big for me to comprehend. What does this mean? It means that if you burn all the data created in just one day on DVDs and you put these DVDs on top of each other of approximately 1.2 mm thickness, then you can reach up to the moon and you can come back twice. So this can really help you understanding the amount of data that will be generated each day by 2025. So problem is how to analyze, how to make these data or the analysis meaningful, and how to deal with this much huge volume of data. And that is where the big data and analytics comes into the picture. So let us understand the types of data we generate could be generated by the human or could be generated by machines. Generated by human, we all understand that sending messages, sending mails, putting likes, sending comments, these are human generated data. Machine generated data means your mobile at the background is automatically generating a lot of data being stored by Google. A lot of GPS data is being sent continuously to the machines. A lot of log files, a lot of machines to machines communications that take place. Lot of data which is being generated by IoT devices, sensors, actuators, lot many things. So huge amount of data is being generated by humans as well as by machines. But then technically we classify this data into 3 categories: the structured data, semi-structured data, and unstructured data. Structured data is something which is well structured, which we really can make sense out of it quickly. All your RDBMS data is stored in the forms of rows and columns. This is structured data. All your CSV files, all your Excel files, these are all well structured, which makes sense to us in a non-intuitive fashion, in a very intuitive fashion. Fine. Then unstructured data, which really do not have any structures, images, the songs, the videos, a lot of log files. These are all highly unstructured, and it is really very difficult to take out some analysis or to take out some meaningful information from the data. And in between these two, there lies something which we call as semi-structured data. Like let us say mail data, it is semi-structured, though it is not the things the mail contains or the body that we write down is highly unstructured, but still you really can figure out a mail from to, from, date, attachment, and what words it contains. So it is a semi-structured. All your JSON data is semi-structured. All your XML data, even all your HTML web pages, these all fall under the category of semi-structured data, which is not 100% unstructured, but which is not very well structured as well. So what are the characteristics of big data? Big data is always the IT world is fascinated by the terminologies. We are discussing here 4 V's, but then there are 7 V's which are we consider as the characteristics of big data. One is the volume. The amount of data that is being generated is humongous. It is beyond our imagination. So big data is characterized by the volume, the huge amount of data. And that is what this volume makes the data big. So we need to have the facilities to store this much amount of data. We need to have the processes or the system in place which really can process this much amount of data and which really can make take out some meaningful decision based on this much volume of the data. So volume is one characteristic of big data. Then second is velocity. Velocity means the speed with which data is being generated. Are our processes really able to process that data with the speed with which it is being generated? Because many of the decisions are to be taken at the runtime. Let us say some fake news is being spread. Then that fake news over the different social media platforms is to be identified in the real-time basis. So that poses another challenge. The velocity which data is being generated, are we really capable enough to process our data and to take out or to mine the data with the same speed? The third characteristic of big data is the variety. The different types of data, the audio data, the video data, the structured, the unstructured. There are so many different kind of databases, so many different kinds of NoSQL databases, so many different kind of IoT devices generating data. Every ERP or every SAP has got different formats. So whole lot of varieties poses another challenge for a big data analytics guy to look into that data and to figure out some meaningful information out of the data. Then third is the veracity. Veracity we call as to what extent the data is correct, to what extent we really can trust those data. Because the correctness and the genuinity of the data makes a lot of sense. If the data is not correct, then whatever analysis will make on that data will also be not correct. So it is really very, very important for us to understand the correctness, the genuinity of the data, and to understand to what extent we really can trust this data. Because a lot of data is being generated by machines, a lot of missing data could be there, a lot of error data could be there, a lot of noise could be there, and lot many things, which makes data to be erroneous. There could be a lot of issues with the data, and we must take care of those issues. Otherwise, whatever analysis that will perform on that data will not be correct. So this probably you all have heard a lot by Mukesh Ambani that data is the new oil. It makes a lot of sense to have data. And then big data is an aviation fuel. if we consider data is oil, then big data is the fuel that can like the fuel your economy. This graph shows again a kind of thing wherein you can notice here that we are at this point of year, and this is the amount of data. And by 2030, of hundreds of yottabytes. And out of this, if you see, the important thing here is the amount of structured and unstructured data. Even at this point of time, we say that roughly we are having structured data is 20%. The rest of the 80% is unstructured data. And figuring out some analytics from this unstructured data poses a lot of challenges. And there comes this big data analytics into the picture. And that too, like the kind of tools and technologies, the kind of processing power, the kind of algorithms we do have, with all these things, it is still a bigger challenge to like perform analytics in the real-time scenario. But then let us see what kind of analytics we really perform and how does it make sense for us. We have the descriptive analytics, the diagnostic analytics, predictive analytics, and then prescriptive analytics. The descriptive analytics says what happened in the past. The descriptive analytics we perform with the historical data. Typically, like we used to have data mining, wherein we used to store the process data over the period of years. We used to clean the data. We used to store the clean data somewhere, and then we used to perform the descriptive analytics. What really happened? What happened with that stock? What were the stock which really like gave better returns? So this is the descriptive analysis, that this particular stock gave like 100 times returns over last 20 years. And again, if we consider this in terms of COVID-19 situation, then what happened? What happened in the China? Over the period of 30 days, there were so many cases. Over the period of 30 days, comparatively, so many cases were there in US. These are the analysis, these are descriptive analysis. We look into the past data and figure out what exactly happened. Then we come to the diagnostic analysis. Diagnostic analysis says why something happened. What happened? Then why that happened? That is this diagnostic analysis. We try to look into the past events and then try to connect the dots and figure out what is something which really caused this event to take place. If we see that a stock gave 100% returns in the past 10 years, then we'll try to figure out the diagnostic analytics will give you the answer that
Hello.
Sir, your voice is not audible.
सर भंसाली सर, प्लीज आपका माइक अनम्यूट कर लीजिए.
is it audible now?
Yes sir, it's audible.
Okay. So like we were discussing like in the context of COVID-19 situation, if you look into diagnostic analysis, then if our cases really did not grow the way it was projected, then diagnostic analysis will give you the reasons. What was the impact of the lockdown 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and so on? What was the impact of different like drugs which has been prescribed? What is the impact of different measures which have been taken by the government? So it gives you a broader understanding of the events that really happened.
सॉरी सर, इंटरप्ट कर रही हूँ. आपकी स्क्रीन प्लीज एक बार फिर से शेयर कर दीजिए.
Okay.
Yes.
Is it visible?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, so we just had a discussion on descriptive analytics and diagnostic analytics. Now we say predictive analysis. Predictive analysis means if something can be predicted well in advance. Like it is very common in the stock market wherein everybody predicts that this is the stock which will give you this much return in the coming 2 years, in the coming 5 years, and so on. So based on the historical records, the system is able to predict the future performance. That is what is predictive analysis. If we see every day in the graphs that in the coming 1 month, the COVID-19 cases will like go up to this many numbers. So many predictive analytics come into that there will be a peak in the month of say July or in the month of November. That is predictive analytics based on the previous data which we have been like collected and analyzed. So predictive analysis is something which is like in today's time, which the machine learning algorithms really can like help you here. They can really help us predicting with the big data what is going to happen into the future. The prescriptive analysis is something which is desired and which is very much like expected with the disruptive technologies, and these technologies can really play a bigger role. Wherein we say that if the lockdown has been extended for another couple of weeks, then this will be the effect, or the cases will reduce by this many number. If this is the line of treatment being followed, then the mortality rate will come down by this much amount. If the company performs or company take over these other companies, then stocks will shoot by this much percentage. So along with the predictions, if it can also suggest you or prescribe you the remedial measures which you really can take, and what will be the impact of those remedial measures, then that is prescriptive analysis. So as we move from descriptive analytics to the prescriptive analytics, we require more resources, we require more data, and we require more like better algorithms, and the complexity increases from descriptive to prescriptive analytics. So at this point of time, we are very good at this prescriptive analytics, and we are moving fast towards prescriptive analytics. So there is a whole lot of technological suites available for big data technologies. We have Hadoop, it is very common, and all our other supporting technologies. Hadoop has got, you probably all who have like worked with big data, it has got HDFS, Hadoop Distributed File System, which is how to manage the big data. We have got NoSQL databases like MongoDB, Cassandra, and kind of things, wherein which suggests how really we store the data which are not structured, how to store this unstructured data into different databases. We have got, Hadoop has also got a processing engine, which we call as MapReduce, how to like analyze or how to look into the big data or the unstructured data and kind of things. It has got another supporting tools and technologies which we call as a Spark, which really is like tool which helps analyzing data in the real-time manner. The real-time news analysis, the real-time analysis of the social media communications which are taking place. So there is a whole lot of technological suites available for big data technologies. So if you got any questions till this point, and you can like put into this chat box, or Dr. Kalpana, are there questions available? I really cannot look into this.
Yes, sir. If any questions are there, queries, I'll write it down.
Okay, so we can take up all the questions at the end, no issues.
Yeah.
So this is just one screenshot which really like will help you understanding like where all this big data is being used. So probably big data is being used almost on all applications, be it healthcare, education, travel, finance, retail. The education, see, this is an era of personalized education. There are like companies which are offering personalized education in association with the universities. Every student will be having like the contents which suits him most and with which he really can learn faster. So we'll not get into this. We'll move on to the next technology, which is the artificial intelligence. This is really like very wonderful domain and which is very close to my heart. This has really like brought the science fiction to the real world. You probably all can understand this poster here. This is from the movie Terminator, and this is the robo.
Hello. Hello, sir. Am I audible to you? Just wait, all the participants. Maybe there is some network issue with sir. I think sir is disconnected. Just wait a moment.
Can you hear me?
Sir. Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Then you have disabled my screen sharing.
Okay, sir. I'll again. Yes, sir.
So in the meantime, if anybody has got questions, then we can really discuss on those questions.
Yes, sir. Now you can share your screen, sir.
Okay. Fine. Visible.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so we were discussing this, that this science fiction has really come to the real world. The Facebook chats which were developed in 2017 and the project was like they were forced to shut it down There were like 2 chatbots. They bypassed the official communication language and developed their own language. And everybody was so scary that they were forced to like shut down this project. So the things which we used to just see in the science fiction movies, that has like completely. So let us try to understand what makes AI and ML so like fascinating. Just these are a couple of historical events. This is Garry Kasparov, 1997, the world chess champion, that was beaten by can somebody respond like, am I audible?
Yes, sir. Now you are audible.
Okay. So like this was an event wherein like the world grand champion Garry Kasparov was beaten by Deep Blue. It was in 1997. Historically, chess is considered to be a brain game. But then this was the event which really like drew people's attention to the field of artificial intelligence. In fact, the Deep Blue, which was an IBM computer, the algorithm was a brute force approach. That was not the AI, what we consider AI in today's sense. That was not at all AI, rather that was a computational task wherein the computer perform all possible permutation combinations with a very fast speed. So that was like that was the first time wherein people or the world got interested in AI. Then the another event which is very important to understand is the 2016 AlphaGo. Go is a Chinese game, and wherein like you play and you try to like encroach more territory compared to other. And the complexity of the game you really can understand from the fact that in chess you have got around 400 opening moves, and in the Go you have got around 1 lakh opening moves. So here from you can like gauge the complexity of the Go game. And the total number of moves which probably available with AlphaGo is more than the atoms in this universe. So I'm giving you data so that you really can understand that no computer could ever be possible, or even the best of the supercomputers really could not or really cannot compute with this much speed and like these many computations. So the approach has to be changed. The brute force computational approach really cannot work in the event of this Go game. But then what happened is that the true AI came into the picture, wherein the machines really learned how the game is played, the way human used to learn. And over the period of time, machine became good enough so that it really could beat the Go champion. And that is where everybody got so much interested in this machine learning and deep learning kind of things. You probably understand AI is there and it is there almost everywhere. As in like all applications that you make use over your mobile phones, everybody has got AI in some or other form. Your like voice recognition, your Google Assistant, your Cortana of Internet, your Snapchat image manipulations, your video mapping, your tagging of the friends in the Facebook, everything has got AI behind the scene. So AI is very much there into the market, and AI is like the market capture is being, it is increasing day by day. And it is not like that you have to have big supercomputers or high power computing performances this is in the reach of almost every common businessman, and everybody can make use of this. This is very important. This is Dave Waters. He is a professor in Oxford University. Predicting the future is magic. It is artificial intelligence. And trust me, you probably have heard that incidents of 2012, worrying like this Google used to send advertisements to a girl which were related to the products for pregnant ladies. Then there was a case filed by the father of that girl, that how come that supermarket is sending this kind of recommendations to my daughter. And later on, the father apologized. Later on, it was proved that that girl was pregnant. So probably the fact is that you yourself don't know much about you, the data or the like artificial intelligence, it knows more than you about yourself. And trust me, probably the Facebook and Google knows more about you than you yourself know. And that is where the future of artificial intelligence is taking us to. Is it audible properly?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So there are different types of artificial intelligence, which we call as narrow AI or weak AI, wherein what is the ultimate aim? We want the machines to be as good as human beings. That is the first thing that we want to achieve. And the next thing that we want to achieve is the machines should be able to perform the task better than humans. Fine. So at the present state, machines are nowhere close to the human intelligence. Artificial narrow intelligence, what we call as weak artificial AI, weak AI. Weak AI is what? Wherein the AI can perform a particular task better than humans can do, like voice to text conversion, the image recognition. So perform wherein we want computers to perform most of the tasks that human can perform at par with humans. So people predict that by 2050 probably we'll be able to achieve that stage where we say that AGI, that we call as strong AI. And the third we call as super AI, or artificial super intelligence, wherein the machines will take over the humans. Machines will be able to perform tasks much better than humans can perform all the tasks. And that is where there are like debates that will machines ever be able to achieve that level of intelligence. This is very interesting how artificial intelligence evolved over the period of time. That was concepts were there since 1950s. Alan Turing gives the Chinese room concept and Turing machine concept. Since 1950s to till that people got interested in kind of things since the beginning of 2000, and the real work started from 2010 onwards. So we must understand the timeline. Since the concepts, algorithms, everything was there since years and years. Even before we look into this, let's look into this. The machine learning is a subset of artificial intelligence, wherein machines learn and develop expertise in performing a particular task better than humans do. And that is where we like had a look into the predictive analytics come into the picture. So machine learning by and large is a predictive analytics at this point of time. Then deep learning is even a subset of machine learning, wherein machine learns in the form of neural networks in the same way as human used to learn from experiences. So this is what artificial intelligence, a broader spectrum. Machine learning is a subset of artificial intelligence, and deep learning is a further subset of machine learning. And this is the timeline that you can see. This deep learning really came into the picture since 2010 onwards, and that is where the major breakthroughs in the domain of AI ML took place. So the question is, why actually 2010 onwards? What was missing? For machine learning and deep learning to work properly, the most important thing is not the algorithms. The most important thing is the data. So we really did not have at this point of time a huge amount of data available to us. And even if we had a huge amount of data, we really did not have a huge amount of computing power. So from 2010 onwards, we had better algorithms, which we call as deep neural network algorithms. We had huge amount of data that we call as big data. At the same time, we had breakthrough in terms of computing capabilities. We had GPUs from NVIDIA's CUDA processors and kind of things, which were like our computing powers were increased many folds. So all these things together, the algorithms, the availability of the data, and the availability of the computational power, these all made it possible to make breakthrough achievements in machine learning, deep learning from 2010 onwards. This is how data makes sense. Let us have a look at this picture. The amount of data versus performance of the AI. So even if data available, but then most machine learning algorithms doesn't make much use or much sense out of this data. Whereas the new AI algorithms, which we call as deep learning, and which could be possible only because of the availability of computational power, you see that performance improves along with the data and time, and your performance becomes much and much closer to the real life situation. And this is how just statistical data to understand the computational efficiency, how did it improve over last 10 years or so. We have CPU, which is roughly you can compare it with 1 million connections, neuron connections. Then we had GPU, graphical processing units, which were of the order of 10 million connections. Then we have cloud GPUs available, which were in the order of 1 billion connections. Then we have high performance computing, which is many GPUs together into the cloud, and it has 100 billion connections. And this 100 billion is a number which roughly is same as the number of neurons in human brain. Of course, there is no such, these both two things are not relevant, but this is just to give an idea that how this GPUs really made a breakthrough achievement in the computational performance. And that is where the deep learning came into the picture. And that is where the most of the significant AI breakthrough were made possible by this computational power and big data analytics. Now let us just try to understand what is the difference between a traditional programming approach and machine learning. So the traditional programming, you write down a program that is a set of rules, and then you give the data to the program, and program gives you an output. So you write down a program. You don't give it a set of rules. You gave it the data, historical data, and you give what is the output for these data. And then computer learns from these data that what should be the rules, which rules are automatically calculated based on the input and output. There is obviously a relationship between the data input and the expected output. So that relationship is calculated or computed by the machine, and rules are framed that we call as model. So here the difference is not written by you. The programming rules are created or generated by the machines, and those programming rules or models gets better and better with experience. That is where the traditional programming versus machine learning differs. The approach is different. That is what, let us look into even detail. We have historical training data. The entire training data can contain, say, hundreds or thousands of columns. All the columns may not contribute to the outcome. So we select what are the columns, and we call these the feature vectors, which really affect the output. We feed these feature vectors or columns to a machine learning algorithm along with the output, and the algorithm calculates the best possible relationship between the outcome and the input. And those rules that is figured by the algorithms, we call these rules as model. And next time, once the model is created, we test the model. So out of this historical training data, we keep some data as the testing data. We again feed in the feature vectors of the model and calculate the percentage of errors in the actual outcome and the predicted outcome. Depending on that, the models further retrained or another algorithm is selected. And that is how a model is prepared for a machine learning. Once the model is ready, that model is deployed, and then the incoming fresh is fed to the model, and model gives the predictions. That is how typically machine learning works. And what is deep learning? Deep learning, as we already have seen, it's a subset of machine learning. So the only important difference is that 80 to 90% human efforts in case of training the model, 80-90% effort goes into extraction of the features, or what we call as feature pre-processing. The data pre-processing means the figuring out the missing values, putting in or substituting missing values.
Sorry, sir.
Yes.
Sorry, sir, to disturb you.
Yes, please.
Hello, I am audible, sir?
Yes, you are audible. It seems I am not audible properly.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, you are audible. Hello.
Sir, due to some time constraint, we need to conclude the session, sir.
Okay,
sorry
no problem.
for
We'll conclude here
inconvenience.
itself, no problem, hai na? Fine. So this is here, this deep learning comes into the
Okay,
picture.
sir.
And now the next further technologies we skip, and we conclude the session here only. Any questions?
If the participants have any question, they can unmute yourself and ask the question. If the participants have any question, you can ask them. Okay, sir. I think your session was self-explanatory.
Okay.
I know that participants want to hear you more. They are messaging me why you stopped the session, but I'm really sorry for that. Due to some network issue and constraint, we have to stop this session. So
no problem. Thank
I
you.
would like to thank Dr. Ashok Bhansali sir for giving such a nice and knowledgeable session to all of us. I think all the participants is benefited for all from this session. Thank you very much, sir. Here we are sharing one token of love, token of appreciation, one certificate with you. Thank
thank
you
you.
very
Thanks.
much, sir, for accepting our invitation.
Thank
Thank you, sir.
you. And thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.